The top business stories, live from the Sky Newsroom. The world braces for President Trump to announce a slew of tariffs, which are set to reshape the global economy. We'll assess the impact on America's international trading partners and ask how they could hit back with an advisor to the German Ministry of Finance. Plus, the president's much-touted Liberation Day paralyses markets, with investors turning bearish on the US dollar. Historically, of course, the world's reserve currency. Very good morning and welcome to Business Live on this Wednesday morning, on a big day for the world's economy, because we are all braced for Donald Trump to announce sweeping tariffs tonight on what has been called Liberation Day. It's unclear exactly how high they could go, with the president due to outline his plans at a so-called Make America Wealthy Again event at the White House later. But it is clear they could spark a global trade war, reshape the world economy, and change fundamentally the way we do business. Well, delighted to say, throughout the programme today, we're joined by Russ Mould, Director of Investment Director at AJ Bell. Very good morning to you. Great to have you in the studio.
Pleasure.
Friend of the programme, it is fair to say. It is a big day, and it's a big day, isn't it? Because, frankly, we don't really know what he's going to say.
I wish I knew, and then I would gladly tell you and everybody else. But there was a great quote.
You wouldn't. You'd be off investing somewhere.
Well, not necessarily. But there's a great quote in the Financial Times this morning. Somebody was saying that everybody's aggressively doing nothing right now because they're trying to work out exactly what will be coming, whether it's a flat rate, whether it's changed by country, what products are involved. When we know that, maybe we can then start to price in what they mean, and then markets might find a little bit of a better footing than they've had recently.
And that is true, but at the same time, it is extraordinary, isn't it, that world leaders from Mexico to Canada to China to here in the UK will be sat down at 9 p.m. tonight,
just like
waiting on, like the rest of us, but waiting on every single word that President Trump will say.
And then they'll be deciding to try and formulate what their response is, if they feel there's an appropriate need for retaliation, or if they can strike a deal, which is what I think a lot of financial markets are still hoping is the case, that the President Trump, the man who wrote The Art of the Deal, that's what he's looking for, rather than some ideological trade crusade.
Well, Russ, as you say, it's going to be a big day, and you were with us throughout this programme today, and indeed later on. But we're going to bring in one of our guests, because as we've just said, the world is waiting to learn exactly how they could be hit and weighing up their options about how best to respond. Well, joining me now from Boston is Martin Jacob, Professor of Accounting and Control at the IESE Business School and a member of the Scientific Advisory Board at the German Ministry of Finance. Very good morning to you, Martin. What's the mood like there in the US?
It is very interesting. I mean, it was a long-planned trip. I'm here in the US, and it's very interesting. When you speak with the taxi driver, you speak with the people here, it's tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. Everyone has this on his or her mind. It's the overarching topic. And to be honest, my feeling is people are not feeling well. People really don't like this idea. They are waiting for the press conference as well. As you just said, it's every leader in the world looks at it, but I have the feeling this will be a most watched press conference. By the way, this is something I guess Trump likes.
Indeed, yes. I think the TV ratings, we'll probably hear about them in the days to come. He will definitely trump those ratings. But in terms of the impact we're likely to see, we're all trying here to work out what it may well look like. Do you have any sense of just the scope of these tariffs? Because it does look like they are going to be pretty universal.
Yeah, that's what we expect. And this will be for the global economy really, really bad. I mean, not just for the UK, for the whole European Union, where the US is a huge trade partner. But ultimately for the people here in the US, it will mean, with some delay, much higher prices. Inflation will skyrocket. And this is something that will, in the end, what they call here Main Street, right? What Main Street will not like. But globally, let's think about the UK, let's think about Europe. A lot of manufacturing companies will suffer. If this tariff will come, they will suffer. Their production capacities are high. If they cannot sell all their products to the US, we will have to find new trade partners. By the way, this would be our chance. So there's also some hope. Let's put it like this.
Well, that's interesting you say that. What do you mean by that? As always, in every situation, there are opportunities. What are the opportunities for Germany and the European Union in this?
So one thing, of course, you have to deal, you have to negotiate with Trump, but on the other hand, you have to retaliate. But now what happens is, let's say you now shift away trade from the US, you have your products, right? You need to sell them somewhere. So where can you sell them? Well, in the end, you need to find other partners with Canada, Mexico, with UK. I mean, let's put all of those countries together. All those countries together are larger than the US. It's a huge economy if you think of them. We will have other markets. What about Latin America? I also have the feeling that we will have to be closer to countries like China, markets like China. It's not easy. It's not an easy time, not at all. I mean, I don't want to be a politician right now. Let's put it like this.
And it's not easy, particularly for Germany. I mean, Germany's had a pretty rough ride the last couple of years. I mean, effectively hasn't really grown since COVID. And while there may well be opportunities, this is far from ideal, and far from ideal timing, particularly for a new government.
Oh, absolutely. And especially thinking of the budget situation that Germany faces. I think it's one of the worst situations we had in many years. And then, of course, we have increased military spending. I mean, you had it on the news, right? The more than 500 billion spending that they now just announced. This has to be spent. This has to be financed. This has a huge impact on the stock market, on the debt market. Interest rates will increase, and this will be a problem for the economy. So I think this is also one big difference to 2017-18 for the first Trump administration. Germany is not in a position of strength right now, which, of course, back then with Angela Merkel, she could negotiate from a completely different standpoint with much more strength. Now, Europe has its own issues, and this makes the whole situation, the negotiation situation, a little bit more vulnerable. And I think this is what Trump tries to use with his 25% tariffs that we will hear tonight. And this will be, I think, in Europe, a big issue, because you have to, in that case, you have to, as one European Union, you have to negotiate with them, and not just single countries.
OK, it is going to be quite the ride tonight. Martin, really appreciate your time. Martin Jacob there, live for us in Boston. Interesting, Russ, what Martin was talking about there, which is the opportunities here, because I think the US is only something like 13% of global trade. I mean, there is a lot of trade happening around the world that doesn't involve the United States.
That's 87%. That's an International Chamber of Commerce statistic, I think, isn't it? So that is clearly one way in which maybe nations will look to respond, not just with punitive retaliatory tariffs, which could lead to a wicked spiral, but, as you say, seek out fresh markets and try and find new opportunities.
But particularly big challenges for big manufacturing countries like Germany.
Well, I mean, they're one of the biggest ones in the firing line, because they run a trade surplus with the United States, which is what President Trump is desperately keen to reverse. And as we've just heard from the professor, Germany's economy is not in a great place. It's trying to dig itself out by changing its debt rules and get some growth going. But you can argue that Trump feels this is a good time to strike. OK. Well, the president's announcement later today is set to reshape global trade, upending decades of pretty constant globalisation. Let's speak to Elaine Dusson, who is head of international trade at the global law firm Hogan Lovells. Very good morning to you, Aileen. And we're just talking there about trade and the fact that, yes, of course, the United States is a powerhouse. Globally, it is the world's largest economy. But there are ways and means, and we've seen this in the past when it comes to tariffs, to circumnavigate them, to come up with clever ways to ensure that you can still trade with the United States, maybe even avoiding some of these tariffs. Is that fair?
Well, I think to your point, what we have to remember is we have seen over the past few weeks sort of increase in tariffs on various sort of aspects of the economy, right? So some trading partners have already been subject to increased sort of tariffs, Canada, Mexico, China being some of them. Then additional products sort of being also targeted with increased tariffs, steel and aluminium, car imports into the US that are more expensive. And clearly the trade has not stopped. It is clear that it is going to be more expensive. It is more expensive for a number of exporters to the US to actually continue to do business with the country, but it doesn't mean that from one day to the other you actually stop trading with the US. There are also some discussion that one can have in terms of, relocalizing in the US. I mean, this is what we understand is the objective of the administration, with more sort of domestic policies as well, providing more incentives to sort of relocalize a lot of foreign-made production into the US. So there are various sort of options that are still out there for traders. But again, I think to your point, we are all waiting to see what exactly will be the details in this announcement that will be made this afternoon, whether we are going to see sort of products around sort of 1,000 lines of nomenclature, customs line being impacted, some countries being hit harder than the others, the UK potentially be hit to a lesser extent than the EU based on the various announcements we've heard from the administration. So a lot of this is still sort of at play, but clearly there will be an impact.
There will, and the question is then how do countries, trading bodies like the EU respond? And the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, has been quite bullish about all of this, a sense that they will hit back, whereas we've taken a slightly less punchy take, if you like, suggesting all things remain on the table, but the EU does look like it will impose retaliatory tariffs.
Yeah, that's right. I think the EU already has announced retaliatory measures after the steel and aluminium import sort of tariff increase that we've seen a few weeks ago in March. So we already know that there will be retaliatory measures on some products. What I think we are waiting now from the Commission and sort of the member state is really sort of what will be the reaction after today's announcements. We know that over the past few years, the EU has increased its legislative sort of ability to respond to what it calls anti-coercion measures, right? So it has an anti-coercion instrument from an EU legal perspective that allows the EU to actually impose retaliatory measure if what we are seeing this afternoon will be considered as economic coercion towards the European Union. And the variety of measures that could be imposed are quite sort of wide. We would be looking at potentially targeting US digital services into the EU, potentially looking at foreign investment measure targeting US investors in Europe, intellectual property rights being targeted as well. So there are various legal instruments that the EU now has at its disposal to respond potentially from tomorrow morning.
Aileen, really appreciate your time this morning. Aileen Dusant there from Hogan Lovells. Thank you. Well, let's bring in Martin Wolf, the chief economic commentator at the FT. Martin, very good morning to you as always. Let's take this in the broadest possible sense. How much, in your mind, is this a big moment, not just for the US, but indeed globally?
I think it's a gigantic moment. One of several we've seen in the early period of the Trump administration, most obviously his attitude to European defense, NATO, Ukraine. So what we're seeing here is the deliberate destruction, be very clear, of a trading system that the US itself created since the war. It really started in 1947 with the initial negotiations of what's called the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, under a series of negotiations culminating really in 1995 with the creation of the World Trade Organization. The US and all other countries committed themselves to bound tariffs, so they committed themselves to keep their tariffs stable, to change them only in response to very specific and clear violations or threats, that they would operate processes domestically that will be consistent with those agreements when they decided to protect their countries. They would abide by WTO rules and the adjudication process and of the WTO. This is a whole set of agreements which was the underpinning of the entire extraordinary growth of world trade and prosperity since the Second World War. And basically, Trump is destroying all of that, all those agreements, all those commitments, essentially overnight. It covers the whole world, and that whole system is gone. And with it goes any predictability of trade policy. And not only is it these trade barriers incredibly high, bringing us back to the 30s, not a good period, but they are also completely unpredictable. I regard it as an act of economic vandalism, and from the point of view of the recipient countries, as an act of economic warfare.
Well, pretty punchy stuff, Martin. And the extraordinary thing is tonight is called Make America Wealthy Again, but you can make an argument America's never been wealthier, and it's entirely benefited from the era of globalization that we've been through. So what is, I know you don't agree with it, but what do you think the rationale here is? What is going through President Trump and his advisors' minds about why they think this is a good idea?
Well, the only way you can put it, Trump is what we economists call a mercantilist. And this mercantilists were the people that Adam Smith wrote against in the most famous book in economics, The Wealth of Nations, in the late 18th century. Essentially, he believes you win in trade if you export more than you import. You have a trade surplus. You lose if you're the other way around. The US has been, by these measures, losing, not vastly, but it has been importing more than it's exported for a very long time. From his point of view, that means the rest of the world is taking advantage of the US and impoverishing it and ruining its manufacturing. Now, if you actually look at it, as you say, the US is the richest big economy in the world, one of the richest in the world. It is fantastically dynamic, innovative. It has shifted its resources from inefficient manufacturing into other sectors where it's spectacularly competitive and dynamic. And what it's failed to do is to do anything about the people who lost out, which is entirely its own fault. But for Trump, this situation in which they import more than they export is a crime against the US. They've been ripped off. And the big rippers off us, the people who are doing it, are, of course, China and Germany, and therefore Europe.
Martin, it's Ross Mould from AJ Bell here. You mentioned China there, and we've heard a lot about America, about Europe and the UK and their possible response. You've just been in China. What are they thinking and looking at as they see all of this develop right now?
Well, they have been a little used to this because they've been targets last time. The Chinese, I think, are pretty confident that they can cope. They have a big investment in trade, but a lot of their markets are elsewhere. They have already diminished their reliance on the US significantly. Of course, it will affect them, but they also think, as far as I can see, well, the US is going to damage its alliances. It's going to damage its credibility with countries all over the world. It's going to hit weak countries and strong countries, allies and enemies. As far as one knows, we don't know for sure yet. And so basically what they're seeing is their principal enemy make what they think of as a huge own goal. So it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt America and America's position in the world even more. So from the Chinese point of view, what's not to like?
Martin, thank you very much indeed for your time. Fascinating stuff. I know you think a lot about this, and we really appreciate your insight this morning, live there from the FT in the city. Thank you very much. Just to give you a sense of some of the lines we're getting, maybe a bit of a picture about what may well be announced tonight. We're hearing from the French government in the last couple of minutes saying that they expect there will be what they brand powerful tariffs imposed in the range of 20 to 25%. That is coming from a French government spokesperson. So a sense that we are looking at something significant here, Ross.
Yeah, that's a very, very large number. If it's a flat rate on pretty much everything that you can think of, financial markets, I guess, at least might be able to say, well, we know how bad it's going to be. Can we now strike a deal and try and find our way around it? But that sounds like quite a frightening number on the face of it, yes.
OK, Russ, for the moment, thank you. We're going to take a quick break here on Business Live on Sky News. Up next, we'll be looking at how the markets are reacting this morning. The FTSE already down, and that's before the announcements. We'll have all the details in just a couple of minutes. Do stay tuned.
You are on Sky News. Welcome to the BAFTAs.
I'm Katie Spencer, Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent. And from the BAFTAs to the Brit Awards, the Oscars to the Olivier's, our entertainment team is here interviewing some of the biggest stars in the world.
It just made more sense that 90% of our cast were formerly incarcerated men.
I'm used to playing characters that are a little bit evil.
We're having a children's laureate off. This is great.
Two laureates for the price of one.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it's happened.
There's this illusion of power.
I feel like I should say namaste, Brad Pitt. Your character, Brad Pitt, is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that?
Sky News.
Congratulations.
Hello.
Maverick, here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
Well, some of the answers we get can be rather unexpected. We aren't afraid to ask the trickier questions others might shy away from.
You okay, guys? You're not getting cold out there. Mr. Wallace, do you regret the inappropriate comments?
Never did I myself reach the point of striking Miss Heard in any way.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news.
Opening night of the UK leg of Taylor Swift's £1 billion grossing tour.
I love you, ain't that the worst thing you ever heard?
Such is the spending power of Swifties that her 15 UK shows are projected to boost the economy, thank you very much, by almost £1 billion.
You slay, Taylor! We love you, Taylor! We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Well, let's have a look at how those markets are doing in a bit more detail this morning as we all await that announcement from Donald Trump a little later on today in the White House. Let's speak to Mia Bandari, who joined us. Very good morning to you, Mia. And my big question is, they're already down, certainly in Europe and elsewhere, and that's before the announcement's even been made.
Yes, quite. Good morning, and thank you for having me on. I think there are at least, if you will, 4 questions on tariffs, some of which we will learn the answers on today, perhaps others which will frankly take much longer. Who or what is targeted? I think we have some sense of who is targeted, and that's where we're seeing some of the responses. You alluded to that earlier on in your show, so the 15 countries that account for the lion's share of US imports. But the other questions, by how much, how other countries will react, what their reciprocal tariffs are, and when all of this comes into force, is still very much up in the air. And I think the how much and how other countries respond are really key at the moment.
And it's interesting that this announcement has been made at 9 p.m. our time, 4 p.m. US time, i.e. after the markets have closed.
Well, I mean, I think it sounds as though from reports we've received overnight, the how much is still being worked out. So perhaps we need that time. And that how much is tricky because it really hinges on what is used to measure unfair trade. So it seems unlikely, as I think some of your previous speakers have reflected, to reflect just tariff differentials, which would add just 1 to 2 percentage points to the effective tariff rate. I think based on what we've learned over the last weeks and months, it's likely to include non-tariff measures, capturing things like FX undervaluation and VAT. And the range of possible outcomes is pretty wide and uncertain. And certainly at Neuberger Berman, we wouldn't rule out a high starting point, perhaps 20% for most major trading partners. But we would also emphasize 2 other points here that I think are quite important. The first is that this is likely to be a negotiation tool. I think it's a point Treasury Secretary Bessent made quite clearly, including yesterday, reflecting that today's announcements would really represent a cap. So the final number is likely to be lower. And second, kind of in keeping with this conclusion, and Martin Wolf alluded to some of this earlier on, the numbers we are speaking of here are large and would take us back effectively to the period in the 30s and 40s in terms of the overall effective tariff rate. So on balance, our judgment is that these are unlikely in full force.
OK, Mia, really appreciate your time this morning. As I say, we are all waiting and expecting this announcement this evening. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed. And Russ, that's the interesting bit here, is that, historically, we're talking about going back to a period of time in which very few of us were alive. I mean, we're talking about going back to the Great Depression almost in terms of the overall economics. I'm not saying that's where we're going to end up economically itself.
We like to think that, but when America passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930, I think there's an economic consensus, and economists don't tend to agree on that much, that those tariffs prompted a trade war that made a very difficult situation an awful lot worse than it would have been otherwise. And I think that's probably seen as the worst-case scenario that we could face right now. That's why haven assets like gold, you would guess, have been doing extremely well in the past, 3 or 6 months, because gold's ripped up 20% this year already, which I don't think, really anybody expected.
Yeah, that is extraordinary. That's another piece of the story we haven't really touched upon, is just how much gold has surged and how much gold has left London to go to New York.
You know what? I'd love to know who's buying it, because this money, this is gold that's leaving Europe, leaving the UK and Switzerland and going to the States. So I'd love to know who's buying it and what they're thinking, because it's extremely intriguing, that trend. It's actually affecting American GDP numbers. There's so much gold moving around, because it counts as an import, and imports detract from GDP numbers.
Wow. Russ Mould, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. And you will be back with us at 4:30 this afternoon, because we'll be covering this unsurprisingly again in the lead up to that announcement at 9 p.m. Full coverage throughout the day here on Sky News. So do join us for Business Live at 4:30 this afternoon. Up next, it is Prime Minister's Question Time with Jane Secker and Sam Coates. We're expecting, of course, this almost certainly to come up at PMQs. Keir Starmer saying that all options remain on the table. It is the final PMQs before the Easter recess, so do stay tuned for that at midday. And I will see you at 4:30 this afternoon. Do stay tuned. Goodbye.